Hello. How are we feeling, Melbourne science and comedy fans? Good? Yeah. So my name is Dan Woodman. I'm the T.R. Ashworth Professor of Sociology at the University of Melbourne. Now, be honest, did anyone read that as Trashworth? Yeah. It's not the first time that's happened to me. Some of you might even be thinking, oh my God, maybe this researcher is like the bin chicken of scientists. You know, I get deep into the dark, wet, stinky recesses of the worst of human behaviour. Maybe it's even about reality TV. But no, sorry, it is definitely T.R. Ashworth, so no Married at First Sight tonight. So Thomas Ramsden Ashworth, he was an early 20th century Melbourne businessman, and I think euphemistically you call him a character. So he ran away to sea at 13, ran for Parliament a bunch of times, and he had a farm where he engaged in cutting edge but ethically questionable experiments in breeding chickens. But he made his real money, his big money. Being the man in Melbourne, you go see, if you needed something, pretty much anything, put in a can. And so when he died, he left some of that sweet, sweet canning money to the University of Melbourne. Because he said we needed some more sociology, some social science, if we were going to build a successful future Australia. So now that I'm in the role he funded, I've taken up that cause by looking at the changing transition to adulthood. We tend to look at this through the avocado-coloured lens of the generation wars. So you know this, it's the boomers had a good run and then ruined everything. Shout out to the boomers in the audience tonight. And then, the other side of it is the millennials could have had a good thing, but they wasted all their money on, fancy breakfasts and maybe comedy tickets. So shout out to the millennials in the room tonight. Thank you. The booze. Look, these are stereotypes, they're bad stereotypes. They're about as good a guide to kind of contemporary Australian intergenerational relationships as, I guess, those reality TV shows like Married at First Sight are a healthy guide to contemporary relationships. But look, there is this little grain of truth to it. The world has changed. When the boomers were kids, you could buy lollies for yourself and all your friends for a florin. I had to Google what that was. It wasn't that much money. You might have had to worry about a little bit of old-fashioned bullying, but cyberbullying was not a problem. Look, but most importantly, it was so much easier, much, much easier to catch polio. So that's a joke. A good polio joke. Yeah. But it was to make the point that, like, these generational stereotypes where you say overall, whether it's better or worse, they don't help a lot. But my research does show that it is taking young people in Australia longer to build successful adulthoods. This is harder for them, but also often for their parents, because even 20-somethings are relying more on the bank of mum and dad. A few parents saying, why did I buy the ticket for you tonight, young millennial? Before I get into my research, I want to deal with, let's call it the scientific elephant in the room. When I mentioned Married at First Sight earlier, there was a couple of folks, I reckon these two in the front row, they looked really disappointed I wasn't going to be talking about maths. But I reckon most of you that I can see, you were pretending as hard as you can, you have no idea what maths is. That's not for you. Future science talks, people. Classier group. You might even be looking at your ticket now, just to check that it does say science talks. Then you've got this guy here talking about sociology, social science. Is that even a science? This guy's thinking, can I get a refund? Look, these are all very good questions. We social scientists don't have anything useful to say about dinosaurs. Unless things go very wrong, we never get to set anything on fire. And they don't let us hand out drugs. Okay then, so what makes social sciences science? Well, me and the team I work with, we do use the scientific method. So we try to get a representative sample of young Australians and follow them over time, using a mix of methods to test different research questions. But we also think that for our type of research, you need to understand experiences and what they mean to the people going through them. So natural scientists don't really have to deal with this. And look, it's probably for the best that their objects of research don't get the chance to talk back. So you're probably thinking now, okay, social scientists, they study people, they know how we tick. They must be the cool kids of science. Look, I'm going to disavow that idea real quick. In sociology, there's a branch that looks at small group interactions, and the entire premise of this field of research is it's inexplicable to us that people can talk to strangers at parties. So next time you're at the party, the sad guy, that's the sociologist. He's going, what the hell's going on here? The three people having fun, they're talking about dinosaurs and Bunsen burners. Well, at least while they wait for those sweet drugs that they stole from the lab to kick in. Anyway, back to the research. So me and my team, we follow kids. In a non-creepy way. Look, it's mostly non-creepy. We want to know about young people's work and education and housing transitions, but we do ask about other things, including their intimate relationship transitions. We don't follow anyone into the bedroom, but every now and then we end up in the bathroom. So we want to survey young people each year, so we've got to make the surveys as easy to do as possible. So they're designed to be on your mobile phone. And I reckon a good half of our surveys get completed while people are sitting on the can. But I talked about how we also care about meaning. So we do interviews with a subsample from our study each year where we talk about how life's going across different things. And my God, I've heard some disturbing noises in the background on a few of those conversations. Okay, so using these methods, we've looked at how Australia's changed over recent decades. We've actually been following young people since 1991. The world's changed since then. In 91, the Soviet Union still existed, just. It's on the way out. This is how we did our social networking. And I was 11 years old. So I just want to pause here and let people take in the awesome 1990s, early 90s fashion for a little while. Particularly want to point out the fluorescent yellow wristband I'm rocking here. So I hope you'd already guessed before I put this photo up that I didn't start this study. Thanks to the backstage team, David, and whoever's done the lighting. I reckon I'm looking good. Not a day, I reckon I don't look a day over 43. You're never going to guess this, but I am 43 and a half. So we've been following young people, the team, from 1991 until today. So we're recruiting some people finishing high school this year. And what we've found is the transition to adulthood, particularly career work, it is taking longer. Look, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes young people taking a little bit longer to get into work can be okay. Look, particularly because part of the reason is people are studying for longer. Our 91 cohort, they were Gen Xers. They were about 4 times as likely as the boomers to go on to university. We've doubled the number going on to further study again since then. So you could say, if you were being a bit cynical, basically we're letting almost everyone in. Yeah, it is me again. This time I'm rocking a homemade Ninja Turtles costume. Look, I work in an arts faculty now, and being able to drop Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael and Michelangelo into conversations comes in handy. I'm just always waiting and hanging out and hoping that my arts colleagues don't realise that my Renaissance art expertise ends when I run out of turtles. Okay, so people are studying for a lot longer. It's taking longer to find their feet at work. And related to this, people are living at home for a lot longer. This also means that their older parents are having their kids stay at home for quite a bit longer. Look, I've already showed you 2 photos of me, so I probably should clarify that these 2 silver foxes are not my parents. But shout out to the silver fox in the second row over there, who is my dad. Thank you for coming on. I mentioned my dad because I actually moved out of home 3 times in my 20s and then went back before I made it out for good. I hope it's for good. My 2 kids and my lovely wife are here as well. Not going to make any jokes about them because I don't want to have to move home with my parents again. Look, one of the reasons that living at home for longer is kind of stretched out is, as you know, we've also made houses a lot more expensive. So the boomers, and this is just rough, right? I think it was about 172 and a quarter florins, maybe 60 magic beans, something like that, to buy a house. Now it's about $1 million in Sydney and Melbourne. That is a lot of avocado toast. Look, I'm a social scientist, so take this calculation with a big grain of salt. But I've worked out you'd have to forego about 13,000 avocado toasts just to get a deposit. And again, take this calculation with an even bigger grain of salt, but I reckon that's actually enough avocado toast that you could build your house out of it instead. So transitions are taking a lot longer. People are relying more as this goes on the bank of mum and dad. And it's not just to build their avocado toast houses. It's also for this study, living at home longer, but also everyday expenses as people are kind of taking longer to launch. And what this means is we have to worry about inequality in a new way because some parents have much bigger piggy banks than others. So I'm finishing. Back to me. Just one more time. When I started looking at these photos, I couldn't stop. So, you've probably guessed by now, I like to play dress-ups. Look, I was playing dress-ups, and part of that was about imagining what I might be as a grown-up. I would never guessed I'd be a sociologist. I didn't know where that was, or that I'd end up studying this transition to adulthood. But I have been thinking about it as I've been putting together this talk and thinking about this 11-year-old here. He had a good run. So my 2 kids, Pearl and Louis, they're around the same age now. Louis, in fact, is 2 months away from turning 11. So I've been thinking about him and his whole cohort. And I'm hoping that the research we do that tracks how these transitions change will help us make sure that Louis and Pearl and their whole cohort, no matter how much money their parents have, get to make the transitions to adulthood that they want. So just before I finish, I did want to ask, has anyone guessed who I'm dressed up as here? That's okay, it's not the best costume, really not. It's that bloke from the start. So it's not T.R. Ashworth, it's someone that people of a certain vintage will maybe know, a comedian called Yahoo Serious. And this is from a movie that came out around this time where he was playing Einstein as a young man, young Einstein. It's not historically accurate. So he was a comedian pretending to be a scientist. And I think that 11-year-old me would love that, at least for tonight, I'm a social scientist pretending to be a comedian. So it's a little bit of a shout out to that 11-year-old kid. And maybe a good luck charm for me tonight, but for all those future transitions of Australians who are young now, I'm actually rocking this yellow wristband tonight. It's a bit of a good luck charm. So thank you. I've had a really good time. I do hope you have too. And enjoy the presentations to come. There's some really good science. You're not going to want a refund. Thank you.